Please remain on mute while our presenters and other attendees are talking today. That way we can ensure a consistent and flowing conversation. If you do have any questions or comments you would like to input throughout the session, please do feel free to either raise your hand or use the chat function, and we'll be sure to bring up your question. All right, over to yourself, Mark, and JP for introductions and to get going.
Awesome. Well, let's start with you, JP. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everybody. Hope the start to 2022 has treated you well. Happy February. I think everything is underway now for the business world again. My name is JP. I joined Sensei last year, relatively late as product manager, and have been busily learning everything there is to know about this fantastic platform and the company in general. So very honored and privileged to be here today with Mark. And we'll be interested to hear your feedback as well throughout the session on how you operate resources within your business. So back to you again, Mark.
Thank you, JP. Hello, lovely people, and thank you for, well, hopefully not sacrificing your lunch. I hope you have the ability to eat while we talk. That being said, throughout the presentation, I hope that we have quite a lot of engagement. We have lots and lots of customers and non-customers here, which is awesome to see. Clearly, resource management is definitely a very interesting subject. And with that, the extension of timesheet and what that actually means. So really, over the next hour, I hope that we can accomplish those 4 takeaways, really the importance of resource management, why timesheets, and of course the importance of integrating timesheets with your digital capability of project management. And also, last but not least, and that's really why we maintain information, is to gain the insights and what we can actually gain the insights for. Well, I always like to start with, I'm going to call it the business fight. The reason why I call it the business fight, no matter what type of business you are in, ultimately it is always the challenge of determining all of the work that we have in order to operate, grow our business versus the resources that we actually have conducting that kind of work, and how we can balance them. So for me, the big question was always why do we actually manage resources? And from our point of view, and I think most organizations, when you think about it on a big picture, agree that ultimately we want to be able to achieve our strategic goals by conducting all of the work with the resource pool that we have at hand. That also means at times, of course. Sorry, what's the question? Oh, no, sorry.
I think we just had some feedback from people joining, so all good, Mark.
Okay, good, excellent. So when you look at this lovely pyramid, you can see that really objectives and strategy from an organizational perspective always translates, on one hand, into business as usual work or operational work, and on the other hand, into what we refer to as strategic portfolio management, which incorporates program and project management, so projects that we conduct. And we try to balance that against the organizational resources, which, by the way, don't necessarily need to be human resources. Of course, that's a very important component, but it could be resources of all kinds. And within those resources, we determine whether these are internal resources or external resources. So that's the purpose of today's session, determining the resource management capability and timesheet management capability in the context of accomplishing the work and therefore also accomplishing the strategic goals. With that, I actually have our first poll, and if you don't mind answering that poll, which should come up in a second, why is resource management important to you as an organization? Is it because I need to know what my resources do work on? Or is it because I need to charge my resources to the right department from a costing perspective? Or is it because I need to know if I have accomplished the work with the resources I have? Is it all of the above, or maybe you don't even do resource management as such? So I wonder what resource management for you means in your organization. And yeah, clearly when I look into the responses, the first 22, 25 responses are coming. Clearly, all of the above is unexpectedly pushing it up. We've got some more respondents here. We give it another couple of seconds, but yeah, clearly we need to make sure that we know what my resources are working on one hand. And the reason why we want to know that is because we want to ensure that on one hand, the work that they do is of high value. And on the other hand, that all of the work that I need to accomplish can actually be accomplished. Charge out, funnily enough, has a 0%. That's super important for a lot of large organizations. So I'm actually a bit surprised that there's nothing in regards to, well, I need to make sure that resources that I have need to be charged out or need to be costed to the right department. We see that actually quite often. And of course, I need to know if I accomplish the work, and with the resources that I have is the other part. So thank you for playing. So in the context of resource management, I quickly want to outline that work is not necessarily equal work, especially in our space. For those of you who have been in the resource management Ask the Expert session of the past, you may have seen that slide deck before. I like showing that because I really know that work is not equal work. So on one hand, of course, we have project management work, and these project management work can be managed in a whole bunch of different ways, in a traditional manner, sort of a waterfall approach, or in an agile manner where we really have the team in the forefront, not so much the project in the forefront. But of course, an organization also needs to ensure that they manage all of their business as usual work, and that is operational work, tickets work, keeping the lights on, as I like to say, as I like to call that. Lastly, of course, we also need to determine, well, what kind of work is non-working time. The non-working time impacts the capacity for you as a resource manager. So let's say you have 10 people working in your department. In all honesty, you only really have 8.5 people or FTEs working for you, because some of them will always be on holiday, so they may be sick, and this is of course classified as non-project work, and therefore the capacity of your team needs to be calculated accordingly. So work on one hand is super important to understand. On the other hand, of course, the ultimate reasons for project management is resource visibility. We saw that in the poll, of course, work and resource optimization, so that I know that I fully utilize my team without overburdening them. Resource capacity planning, so long-term planning, in particular, if you create your annual plan, your 3-year plan, and know what type of work is going to come, balancing them with your status quo resource management, resources that you have in comparison to the resource pool that you need in order to accomplish those long-term plans. Of course, also for a lot of organizations, a realistic short-term planning and execution is important. Let's say you do have a resource planning cycle of a week or 2 weeks. You always need to know whether these resources are balanced, not over or under allocated. And therefore also eliminating the burnout effect, which we've seen especially in the project work. We know, when a project starts, we always say, yeah, sorry, can we just mute that? Thanks, Vanessa. And then at the end of the project, we suddenly realize, we've got only 10 more days of duration, but 30 more days worth of effort. That means that everybody needs to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just to get the project done. But that, of course, has a very big burnout effect. And ultimately, we want to make sure that through resource management that we increase business value in the context of accomplishing the strategic goals. So when you think about resource management on a holistic way, what we actually try to do is predicting the future. And I say that because resource management is difficult at the best of times. No matter how much you plan in advance, whether you plan a week or a month in advance, things always change, and they change continuously, because most of the times we deal with human resources and, of course, new prioritizations. So if you are doing resource management and your planned resource management is not exactly executed as originally planned, please don't despair. It is very, very, very normal because trying to predict the future, well, unless you have a crystal ball, that one here that tells you that future, it's difficult to predict that. Which leads me to my next poll. And the big question that I have for you, how do you actually conduct resource management in your environment? So do you manage resources through things like project schedules, where you actually create a work breakdown structure and associate them and then coordinate that with your resource manager? Or do you actually, as a project manager, have something like a resource plan, which means that you, based on a high-level estimate, determine what type of resources you need and therefore request them? Do you have meetings and discuss the resource allocation, which is more an informal approach to resource management, but therefore also very helpful because you get together and you can discuss that? Do you have an Excel spreadsheet, or don't you manage resources at all? All right, the first couple of respondents are there, and interestingly enough, we can see that there is a slight lead towards project schedules. There are some people who utilize resource plans, and there may be a confusion between resource schedules and resource plans. I will actually cover that in my next slide deck. You know, one of the issues that we see with resource schedules is that resource schedules are very project specific, and things change all the time. If you have, let's say, 100 projects or 50 projects with 50 project managers, and one of the project managers does not maintain the project schedule on a regular basis, then you will find that the inaccuracy of resource management becomes quite obvious. It literally has a domino effect. So in our experience implementing PPM solutions, we see that if you manage your project resources through project schedules, you really have to have a rigorous methodology and process that is governed well. Most of the organizations actually struggle with that. Yeah, look, I'm not surprised that about 20% of the respondents says that we sit down and we have a meeting, a weekly resource meeting, and then we allocate those resources, which, makes a lot of sense. I think that's actually the best way of dealing with that. Now, when you think about resource management in that sense, what is perceived to be resource management best practices? Well, if we think about resource management, we need to essentially fulfill several different requirements from a resource management perspective. On one hand, of course, we need to know what has historically happened. We need to know what near-term resource requirements we have and balance the work against the resource pool that we have. And we also have the need for so-called long-term resource management, the ability for me to hire at the right time. When I break that down, long-term resource planning is very often done through roles or generic resources, where I say, oh, look, we need another 3 developers, or we need some business analysts, or we need to have some engineers in order to fulfill all of that workload that we see coming down the pipeline. Whereby near term is very much named resources. I'm, as a team lead, I have a team of, let's say, 10 resources. And as such, I need to make sure that I balance those resources, make sure that they're not over allocated and under allocated. And that is often done through, the scheduling capability. So from a reporting perspective or insights perspective, we therefore then also fulfill those kinds of insight needs in the near term, really resource conflicts across active projects and the conflict between business as usual and project work. I would say that almost all of our customers have a resource pool where they share the resource across projects and business as usual work. And one of the big questions we always get asked is, well, how do I distribute business as usual work versus project work? Which I'm sure is a very interesting question to answer. I have seen in the past, especially sort of the organizations that manage their company in sort of a scaled agile framework perspective, that they have dedicated teams that do dedicated project work and have dedicated teams for dedicated BAU work. From a resource efficiency perspective, funnily enough, that seems to be the most efficient way, because people don't have to swip and swap all of the time, which always takes a little bit of time to, to work your way into it. And then, of course, we need to make sure that we approve allocations of resources that we request. Now, many organizations do that in an informal way, where the project managers and the resource managers sit together and say, hey, I need JP for the next 3 weeks, and the resource manager says, yep, you can have them, and therefore approves them. However, more and more organizations formalize that approval process, and therefore also have the ability to know exactly what the cost allocation for these approved resources are. I'll show you what I mean in a second. And then, of course, long-term for us is resource demand. Hey, where are our bottlenecks? What kind of future resources do I need? Or do I need to move some projects in order to overcome those bottlenecks? So that's really in regards to best practices resource management, that's the way that we think. Now, historical actuals, that's generally where timesheets come into place, because the purpose of timesheets is, of course, to capture what actually happened.
Mark, just before you move on from the slide,
yes, please.
We do have a question in the chat about how long time is, or the near-term period, in your opinion.
That's a great question. Thanks, JP. A wonderful question. Well, how long is near term, right? It depends very much on the industry. So we see in construction and utilities organization, near term is generally on a monthly basis, whereby, on professional services, near term is actually on a weekly basis. I think the only organizations that may do that on a daily basis are lawyers or something like that. But I would say a near term is between a week and a month, because that's generally the type of workload that will hit the resource pool. And yes, Ian, that's very true. It's business model dependent, quite clearly. But in our experience, that's sort of what we see, because that near term will also be determining the timesheet setup. So most of the customers that we deal with that manage timesheets do that on a weekly basis, because at the end of the week, they need to know what have I accomplished so that I can replan going forward. So that's what I would call near term, whereby anything beyond that time is probably sort of mid to long term, where we often don't really know whether we have that named resource still available. Yeah, good question. Now, I've mentioned earlier the concept of scheduling, and we saw in the polls that a lot of project managers actually schedule in a project schedule their resources, and that makes sense. But when I think about it on a resource management, PMO resource management level, well, a project schedule is really only a puzzle piece of that bigger picture. And I, as a resource manager, need to ensure that I not just have that one, but all of the projects, including the BAU work. So what we have seen is that when organizations manage their their resource allocation, their resource management in a schedule, it becomes very convoluted because of the project management maturity that requires to be the same. Not to mention that some of the new projects, especially agile projects, they don't have the concept of a time-phased mechanism. Their time phasing is really based on sprints, and these sprints are then essentially, I'm going to call them buckets of time for resources that I have allocated to my project, and through backlogging and through sprint management, I have the ability to feed work into that sprint. So in our experience, what happens these days is that project managers actually utilize the concept of a resource plan. The resource plan is a plan that is disjointed from the resource schedule. You may get the figures of the resource plan based on the schedule, but it is really an umbrella over all of the work that you need to do. And therefore, it is almost like an Excel type experience where a project manager says, hey, I need, a business analyst for the next 3 months or an engineer for the next 3 months, sends that to the resource manager. And the resource manager then has the ability through their own resource pool to determine who is actually most appropriate for that particular role that was requested, and then approves a named resource for this particular requested generic resource. That is then fed back to the project manager, and the project manager then has the ability to utilize the committed allocation of their resources and schedule their work breakdown structure, which I often call, this is more the team management. Resource management goes above that. I need to make sure that I have enough resources available that I can then distribute that type of work through scheduling. And of course, that will then at the same time allow us to provide insights where I, on one hand, see the forward planning resource plan allows me to do long-term planning even. The allocation of a named resource against that allocation allows me to look at potential conflicts and over-allocation. And of course, as a project manager, I now know that the resource pool that I have assigned to myself can actually fulfill all of those tasks. So the difference between a resource plan and a schedule ultimately means that a resource plan is an allocation request of a resource, whereby a schedule gives you the assignment of a resource to a task. They are generally two separate capabilities. Now, what I thought is I'm going to showcase that. And
Mark, sorry
yes,
to interrupt again. There's a couple of more questions that came up during that section. Ian, I see you posted where does the scheduler fit into this picture? I know Mark discussed that to some degree here. Did that answer your questions, or do you want to elaborate on what you're interested in there?
Yes, that was answered during that part of the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah,
right.
Look, Ian, it makes sense. Of course, a scheduler, well, ultimately, the job of a scheduler is to balance the work of that particular project, right? From a resource perspective, even the scheduler is the puzzle piece of that bigger resource picture. Of course, there's a very, very close alliance between resource management and a schedule, or I'm going to call it schedule management as such. What I'll do is in the showcase, I will actually outline how we see organizations conduct that formalization of the resource plan going forward. What else is there, JP?
The second question, also from Ian, doesn't sequencing of agile sprints require scheduling or time phasing?
Yes, well, the sprint in its own right is actually the time phasing, if you think about it, because that's why I always say a traditional project is project focused. I know I need to conduct design, plan, execution, closing. An agile project says, well, we have a high-level plan and objectives, but we want to be able to showcase at the end of each sprint what we've done so that we can quickly navigate into other directions. So therefore, it's often said that an agile project is actually more a team management approach in comparison to the waterfall that is a project management approach. And you are absolutely spot on. The way that you time phase as an agile project is by approving, let's say, the first 5 sprints, and each of these sprints has 5 resources, so therefore you can actually calculate the capacity through the backlog grooming. You then have the ability to allocate the most valuable task to the team per sprint. So you're absolutely right. It is in many ways actually much easier to time phase sprints because I know I've got 5 sprints approved, so that's what I'm going to plan.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, so let me showcase that a little bit. And look, I'm sorry, I don't want to make this here a sales spiel whatsoever, but I want to outline how resource management can be done. Just so that I said it, resource management has been done since the Stone Ages, right? They probably used stones and carved the resource requests into those. And of course, resource management can be done on a piece of paper. It can even be done in an Excel spreadsheet. But in order to really effectively and efficiently communicate and know exactly where resources are, that's how we see the world at the moment is moving. So what I'll do is I'm going to go into one of my applications here. This is Sensei IQ that's actually built on Power Apps. And what I wanted to outline here is literally I can manage as a project manager, of course, all of my projects. And, you know, you can create your projects and actually manage your projects on a whole bunch of different execution schedule tools. Waterfall like projects, agile like Jira, but still have the ability within that project to have that project management consistency, no matter what kind of project management process it is. So what I'll do is I just want to drill into this particular project here. And as a project manager, what I can do is I can, of course, on one hand, manage my work breakdown structure or tasks in the most sensical way. This is an MS project where I manage my tasks. However, I want to be able to request my resources. So instead of creating a work breakdown, well, you can of course create your work breakdown structure so that you know what type of resources are there. So what we are doing here is we literally look at a work breakdown structure, which is nothing else but an MS project work breakdown structure where I have allocation of my resources per task, and that's good from a task management perspective. But if I now want to request those resources, I have the ability to request them in a so-called resource plan. The resource plan enables me to request resources without needing to have a schedule. And if you think about it, a lot of organizations start that way. They actually don't have a detailed schedule. They have a very high-level idea of what they want to do. And in that particular project, I can see that I have business analysts requested, that I have developers requested here, that I have DBAs requested, marketing, so all generic or role-based resources. And the way that I do that is I literally just simply select my resource pool, and I can say here I would like to have a contractor here, for example. That of course now adds the contractor into my pool, and I can now request that resource based on hours. I can say, well, you know what, in January I need I need him for 20 hours. In February, I need him for 80 hours. By the way, you don't have to do that on a monthly. You can do that on a weekly or even on a daily basis if you wanted to. The important bit here is that I, as a project manager, have the ability to determine my resource model, my resource engagement model. I then have the ability to submit that request, and based on that submission, my resource manager will now be notified. Now, again, I don't want to showcase the details of all of that, but conceptually what I wanted to show is that as a project manager, I can request resources through a resource plan. And then as a resource manager, I suddenly get that, I suddenly get an email notification, and I navigate to my resource demand. And as part of that resource demand, I have now all of the requests by project or resources. We can toggle that. And as you can see here, that tenant renewal project actually has resources requested, business analyst. And if I refresh that, you will also see let me just refresh that quickly. You will also see the contractor. I can then literally, as a resource manager, determine, hey, who is most appropriate for this particular role, and do I have availability during that time? So in that instance, here's the contractor that I can see that is requested 20 hours and 80 hours, and I can now go and say, you know what, I'm going to add a resource, and I have now my resource pool available with all of their availability for that time frame that this contractor was actually requested. So in that instance, I can see, oh, you know what, Albert is actually a good resource. I'm going to assign Albert to that. And by assigning Albert to it, it recognizes the amount of hours that was requested. And because the availability of Albert was more than that, it automatically allocated it to him. You could, of course, change that here manually, but it really is sort of that first step towards, I'm going to call it loosely AI, that allows me to determine the best skilled resource for that particular contractor. What I do next is literally just simply save that information, and that will now go back to the project manager, and the project manager knows that Albert has been assigned to their project. Of course, the whole costing behind that project will now be calculated in accordance to the rate of Albert and the amount of hours that Albert was allocated to that. So that is really that forward planning of resource management. What that then turns out to be is it gives me the insights. So what I'll do here is I'm just going to navigate to those insights and check exactly what the picture of that resource request is going to show me. So in that instance, I have obviously my entire resource pool, all of the roles that I have available here that I can see, the department's location, etc. But the important bit here really is the availability. So the availability tells me now, in that instance, on a monthly basis, my overarching capacity, meaning the amount of work that I have staff available working for me as a company. And of course, that varies dependent on holidays and sick days and all of those things. But what I can see is I can now see all of the committed work. That means I, as a resource manager, have committed that work against the resource plan. And I can also see that there is actually now an over allocation. I can even see that down here, what that over allocation is. And from a capacity point of view, I can tell you straight away that, hey, actually a developer right now is completely over allocated by minus 755 hours, and project managers in December are over allocated here as well. Of course, you can bring this all the way down to, let's say, to departments. Hey, I'm the department lead for IT. Let me have a look at all of the resources that I have committed. And I can now see all of the commitment. I can see, okay, in March, we've got a bit of an over allocation that I need to work out. But the rest of the month, they're actually balancing, okay, up until August, where I now start to feel gaps that I may want to fill with work that I need to push forward. So it really gives you that forward planning capability. And of course, it allows you to drill it all the way down to the individual resource, because the data is actually captured to that particular resource. So that's really the part of predicting the future short term as well as long term that allows me then to manage my resource pool. I just wanted to outline that particular resource planning. Now, there was an interesting question, and I want to ask that question to JP as well. So I can hear a lot of project managers saying, you know what, that may all be good with the resource plan, but ultimately what I do is I'm going to create my work breakdown structure in MS Project, for example, and I have those resources assigned. Why would I want to go here extra into my resource plan and punch in those values again in that resource plan? That I think was, rephrasing the question that was asked there. And hey, I get this. This makes a lot of sense. Now, the bigger picture here, JP, I think we spoke about that in the past as well, recognizing that there are project managers that create that work breakdown structure in a schedule. How do you think the product will be able to evolve going down this path, so that the project manager doesn't have to create the schedule and then the resource plan?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it's an interesting area to explore. A lot of businesses deal with things differently, and we have a changing world as well, with all the emergence of agile methodologies to run things along, which adds complexity to the problem. But and it was interesting from the survey results earlier as well, actually, because our direction at the moment in our thinking is that we have resource plan capability, but we would want to provide our project managers with the capability of turning schedules into resource plans.
Yeah.
And earlier in the poll, it was clear that there's majority of people on this call who are actually planning their resources using the schedule. So that's encouraging to see. So that's one direction, if you like, assisting with the automation of the planning side, because project managers being very time poor in general, very busy people. Always good if you can save time and automatically create some of these more complicated structures.
But it really allows us then, if we think about it, because resource plan for us already starts in the business case, really, right? Where I have the ability to say, hey, I've got, you know, this great idea or this proposal or project that I would like to have approved, but I need to determine the resources. And, you know, in our experience, we actually don't see that there's a detailed work breakdown structure, but an indication of what kind of resources needs to be there for how long. So if I have a project that lasts for 3 months or for, let's say, for 6 months, I know that I need to have a project manager there for 6 months, right? So that top down is one thing. And of course, the bottom up, is interesting. And as you quite rightly said, you know, agile projects, well, they don't really plan it that way. Yeah, waterfall, yeah, they plan it out, but even there, they change it all the time. So yeah, I'm sure we'll think very hard of how we want to be able to provide that. I mean, in all reality, it is possible to utilize the assignment of a schedule to have that then consolidated on a resource basis and then just simply move that into the resource plan. So definitely worth looking at.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Look, there are a couple of other questions in the background. I might have missed the color coding. Okay. Yeah. So sorry, I did not go into the. If you are interested in detail, please, you know, give us a call. I'm happy to run you through the details just so that you can see on that project. If I have something in red, it means it has not been committed. That means the request has not been fulfilled. But once the resource manager approves that time, you will see that in that instance, he approved Robin's time, which was requested in January, for example, 84 hours and approved 84 hours. So anything in green, I can say as a project manager, I can see straight away, hey, all of the requests that I have actually been fulfilled, except this one here. So that's what green and red means, by the way. From this view, we see across programs and portfolios the resource roles allocated to. Yes, of course. So the project itself then rolls into a program and into a portfolio as well. And not just, by the way, resources, everything about it, right? Time, tasks, dollars, resources, that's sort of that general view in here. Is there an out-of-the-box config option that resources can't be assigned to a project task unless resource is allocated to a resource plan first? I love that question. Who does that? Ian. Ian, you have very good questions. So that is an awesome feedback. Look, no is the short answer right now. And the reason why we say that is because the schedule is something that the project manager is in charge of. And the project manager should be able to schedule their schedule as they see fit. In an agile world, they even do that with the entire team. The question is always, have I got them allocated? What we do have, however, because we had that request before, just so that I showcase that, we do have a variation report. So I can actually tell you on the insights that a particular resource is allocated through a schedule, but not allocated through the timesheet. Let me show you. Through the schedule, through the resource plan. Sorry. So in that instance, I can see that Jamie, for example, is on that tenant renewal project. And when I mouse over, I can actually see, hey, the allocation variance is minus 73 because Amy is actually on the schedule for 73 hours, but look at the committed requested ever, that's blank. So that means they're not on the resource plan. So that's how we try to resolve that so that we can balance that work. It's a really good question. I might have missed the color coding. I've mentioned that, Vanessa. Can we change it, from green to purple? Maybe we can, but we decided red and green is probably sort of the allocation of it. And by the way, just so that I showcase that as well, on a project on a resource management or team lead management capability, these kinds of color codings form part of what we refer to as the heat map. So I can actually see as part of that heat map, hey, is Amy, for example, over or under allocated in February? I can see right now she still has about 20 days of capacity. When I drill that down, I can actually see all of the projects that she's working on. And I think I will have the ability here to even amend that if I wanted to do that in the resource view. But again, sorry, it's not a product part, it's more visualization of resources and how important that really becomes. So that's the first part. Now I'm conscious of time, JP. You're talking way too much, I can see. Can I move on and actually incorporate the timesheet? Now
we do have one more question in the
sorry,
chat.
we do have one more.
I apologize.
Sorry,
just the one you missed. I want to make sure that
can the resource manager change depending on the department supplying the resource? Oh, that's a good question. Now, Gus, I would say no. The reason why I say that is because a resource usually has a boss, and that boss doesn't change only because I change my project. Now, the boss, I'm going to translate boss as team lead. So we associate a resource to a team lead or a resource manager, and that resource manager is ultimately responsible for ensuring that the resource is allocated appropriately. And that could be on a whole bunch of different projects or even different departments. So therefore, the answer to that question is probably no. However, if the resource, for example, would move from department 1 to department 2, then of course the team lead would change as well. And therefore that new team lead would get that. What we have done. Yeah, sorry.
Expand on that just a little bit, Gus. In case you meant, can resource requests go to different resource managers? Then the answer is yes. So there can be resources can be managed by multiple different resource managers, and project managers can request a resource from department A or department B from different resource managers and see the same view. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Now, see, Gus, that's why I've got JP here, but he understood your question much better than I did. See, JP too. All right. So. Resource management, forward planning, predicting the future, being able to allocate and amend resources versus timesheets. Timesheet has one purpose and one purpose only. It allows a resource to tell my project, my resource manager, my company, what I have actually worked on. And I think that's very important. There is a very negative connotation on timesheeting, the sort of big brother connotation that I like to outline. However, I tell you, there are so many organizations that require the timesheeting for a whole multitude of reasons. And we'll explore those reasons a little bit more. So before we do that, though, I would love to know, does your organization actually do timesheet? Yes or no? Here's the poll available. That should be a nice and simple answer. Oh, actually, we did forget a third one, JP, because there are organizations where some departments do it and others don't. That third part, we should have said half-half. I'm sorry if there's a department out there who does that. If that's the case, then just simply say, yes, we do timesheets, and that at least allows us to determine whether timesheets are done. And look at that. Wow. 85% of the team here does timesheets. And some say option 3. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Cynthia. So that is super interesting. It's the industry really is starting to go very much down the path of being careful about timesheets because of the perception of the information that can be accomplished. Do I perform in accordance to what I planned? Where do I spend most of my time? All of those kinds of things. So in our experience, we have seen a couple of benefits, I'm going to say. So again, the purpose is, have I done the work I was planned to do? That's really the purpose of timesheets. Now, in our view and customers that we see, there are obviously many more benefits, but the main benefits for timesheeting is it allows me to compare the planned with the actual work. And the overarching benefit there is a more accurate estimation. And I say that because if I don't have the ability to estimate the to compare my estimate with my actuals, I will never be able to know whether I can improve my estimate. So that's really benefit number one that we've seen. The second one is cost allocation, especially if you are an IT department and you need to work on, let's say, 10 different projects from the business. How much time have I spent on those projects so that I can cross-charge? And of course, professional services organizations like RIA, for example, of course, timesheets is the holy grail, because based on our timesheets, we then also charge customers for the time that we've spent. So these are sort of the top three benefits. I wonder whether you see other benefits in your organization, and please open up the microphone and and talk to us if you have any other benefits that you see in your organization that are different. And I just simply say, if I don't hear anything, then JP, we've absolutely hit the mark, obviously, right?
I think so, yeah.
There's another one. Thanks, John. We use timesheets for payroll. So of course, yeah, contractors, externals. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Yep. Thank you, John. We should put that onto the benefits. Yeah, allocation versus actual hours. Yeah, Paul, I can see that as well. So yeah, that's awesome. All right. Now, I'm conscious of time. We only have 15 more minutes. Time flies when you're having fun. So let me just introduce a little bit of what we refer to as simplified timesheet management. Timesheets, there are fully dedicated applications that do nothing else but timesheets. The problem is, how do I then know where I allocate my time if I don't integrate or synchronize my project tasks or my admin tasks or even my holiday with the timesheets? So what we've been doing is, in our solution, we've got obviously all of the projects and admin work captured, including, of course, from a resource perspective, their vacation and holidays. What we've been doing is literally been creating a simplified timesheet management capability where organizations and users can quickly go in and out and actually allocate their time against a particular period. I'm going to call that the short-term period. Or near-term period part. So what I thought is I'll quickly run a timesheet showcase so that you can see that, and then I actually have another survey before I then open up for questioning. So imagine, let me just go back to my application. So imagine I am now an end user and I have my timesheets. My timesheet is generally, of course, here in my timesheet section or under my work. You can also see my timesheets. And as part of that, what we have now is the ability to just simply allocate or create a timesheet for a particular period. This here is now timesheet period 2022-7. That's week 7, of course, and you can name that as much as you like. And what we have here is now non-project time as well as project time. And you can see we actually have two different modes here. On one hand, we've seen that a lot of organizations say, look, I don't even want them to allocate their time against the task. I'm quite happy if I just know what their time against the project has been. So in that instance, you can see that we can manage non-project time, so BAU time, including, of course, my sick time, and we also have projects, but only on a project level. Just so that I show you in my play pit, it's not quite as polished as that one. The ability for me, of course, I can also, if I now go into, let me just go into my work. This one here is set up for task management. So if I go in this particular instance into my timesheet, it's a centralized setting, by the way, that you can just simply switch on, where I can now see, of course, my non-project time and then my project with my task allocation. to the point that I can actually add my task, project task to it. So here is now my project task. Here are all of the projects that I'm assigned to, and yes, you need to be assigned to the project. It was a decision that we made based on user feedback and customer feedback that didn't want to go rogue, and that's the reason why we determined that. So here in the expand new all revenue fields project, I now have the ability to say, hey, you know what, I did the Q&A as well, and I'm going to add my task to that. And of course, now I can very easily just allocate my hours in there, no matter what they are. There can be 12 hours, you know, there can be 4 hours, 6 hours. And of course, it adds it up now. Right now, it's a week of 34. Oops, see, because I talk so much, I have set myself timers, so I've got 10 more minutes. Here, then I can, of course, say, oh, and I did some administration worth 8 hours worth of time, 42 hours. And in here, I actually want to outline what admin work I've done. Talked with JP all the time because we need to determine the next resource management feature. Oh man, it doesn't write for you, unfortunately. And of course, I then just simply submit that. Once I've submitted that, that will then go to my timesheet manager. This can be the team lead, doesn't have to be. So we made sure that we differentiate that. But really, ultimately, what that means is as a timesheet manager, I can now look at the list of all of my timesheets. I can see which ones are approved and which ones are rejected or which ones are submitted. And I can very easily, of course, filter them down. And say, hey, where I only want to see the ones that have been submitted and maybe the ones that are in draft, and have the ability then to approve that. The way that you approve that is either by individual timesheet, so you can literally drill into the timesheet and say, let me see what Randy Reporter has submitted. Now, obviously, Randy hasn't submitted anything here. What does that tell me? Well, it tells me that I should probably reject that. And of course, you have the ability to approve and reject those timesheets as well, just like any other timesheet system. So in that instance, you just simply select it, and then I have the ability to approve or reject that. Now, that's sort of normal timesheet functionality. We wanted to make sure, because people are hesitant maintaining timesheets, we wanted to make sure that it looks nice and clean, that you go in and out super quick. And therefore capture that information. Now, what that means in turn, of course, again, from an insights perspective, let me just quickly outline that as well, so that we've done that. Of course, we have now actuals per timesheet, per project, and per task. That means a project manager can actually determine whether we are on track or not. We have, sorry, I just need to reassign that on. We have non-project and project time, meaning that I know who is on holiday when. That's also super important. And I can classify what non-project time am I working on. So I'll give you an example. So here now is my timesheet overview. So I, as the PMO, I need to make sure that all of my timesheets have been submitted. So you can see, as long as this wheel here is green, you know that every project every timesheet per period has been approved. Now we can see some of the project period, some of the periods, timesheet periods. I have some rejected and some draft ones. And of course, I could drill into that and could say, hey, can you please make sure that you actually submit that timesheet? So in that instance, I can see that Albert, for example, has allocated 40 hours to the Geneva Vineyard expansion project. So that is just a timesheet overview, gives you the governance behind it, just making sure that everybody has submitted that. Timesheets actuals allows us really to go deeper into the actuals. And I can now see that across my organization, the vast majority, actually 4,100 hours, has been booked against projects, whereby 515 hours have been booked against non-project time, so BAU or admin time. And I have about 464 hours, yeah, about 10%, that's about right, of vacation booked. So this really gives me a nice overview. And of course, I can do this, break it down by department, you know, to non-surprise. IT will do predominantly project work. It's just the type of work that they do. So it really gives you that insights. But as you can see, there's also some, you know, meetings and non-project time. Well, actually, let me see what non-project time that is, because that's where we may be able to do some additional work refinements. So here I can now see in my IT department, it's actually support. A big portion of it is support that I've done. In this instance is a monthly view. And yeah, look, there were some sick times as well and some vacation time. So we really have the ability to drill this down. Actuals versus forecast. That's really the key here. I'm conscious of time. The last survey that I would like to roll is when we think about timesheet, are you comfortable that you would only be able to put that in on a website or desktop or laptop? Or do you think that a mobile phone timesheet would actually be very useful? Or would you say, well, my expectation really is that I can do that in both my desktop and my mobile? Well, what do you think the answer to that is, JP? Without looking? Don't look, don't look.
I've already cheated, but
Oh.
so I apologize for that. But I'm actually surprised. It is a different response to what I expected originally. I was expecting people to be more commonly using desktops and laptops due to the width of the screen, but definitely being able to design an interface to on the go enter timesheets is something that would be very handy, especially if you have to travel to a lot of locations or have multiple contracts to service. Just to say as well, I am aware there are some questions still in the chat, so I am catching up with them. So we will address those as well during the Q&A.
Cool. Thanks, JP. So clearly you know, it is actually now almost equal. 43% are happy with the laptop, desktop. Both say about 53% and 3% say mobile would be the most sophisticated way, which is great. Now, which I'm conscious of time, I've got 3 minutes left. And this time we actually did not have any pre-submitted questions. However, there was a question flow throughout the whole time. And JP, thank you so much for answering them. I think and we will make sure that you get the questions and answers, of course, in our Ask the Expert pack. But there are a couple of questions here. It is a different question. This is what we use, not what we would like to use. I would love both. Yes, that's fair enough. That's sort of the request of mobile and non-mobile. Need mobile use for business as usual recurring programs. That's a very interesting one, and I think you mentioned it as well, JP. It's actually people on the go, you know, that go from location to location. Yeah, a person entering time only needs a list of activities and needs columns to enter numbers. Yeah, good for mobile. So yeah, I know, JP, we've done this. You know, I remember Microsoft actually bought our mobile app for Project Online, and we designed it that way. So it's definitely worth thinking about whether we want to do this for timesheeting in IQ as well. If the user interface was good, then the ability to update timesheet data on the move would be beneficial. So yeah, I think that's sort of the, you know, the general path that we've got. Now, being conscious that we still have 2 minutes to go, I'm going to open up the flood of questions. Are there any questions that we haven't answered? Yes, Steve. Microsoft decommissioned the mobile Project Online app, and that's because Microsoft obviously is now focusing on the Power Apps capability. They announced that in 2019 already that they're not going to innovate on Project Online anymore and move that all into the into the Power Apps story, which kind of makes sense. Are there any other questions? Well, if you have any other questions after the session, please don't hesitate to put them in, you will be able to see our contact details in the deck that we will of course share with you. So next steps, keep on the lookout. There are webinars and of course this recording here as well. If you want to share that with someone else, please do. Our next event is the Future of Microsoft Project Online, which is going to be a super interesting one. That is on the 11th of March. I encourage all of you that uses MS Project and Project Online to register here. And of course, please don't hesitate to follow us on LinkedIn. With all of that being said, look at that. I'm good on time, JP. Is there a closing statement that you would like to outline before we close the session? Oh,
just in general, go ahead. Is there somebody else with a question?
No, it's all good.
Was it something? I thought I heard somebody start talking. No, just wanted to say thank you for all the chat and the messages or so. Lots of interest and lots of good conversation. And thank you, Mark, for taking us through that detailed view as well. For any of you who are interested and have asked a question, if we haven't been able to cover it in here, we'll follow up with you after the fact, and you'll get a response from that. But otherwise, great session and
Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. Indeed.
Yes. Thank you so much, team. Thank you so much. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mark and JP.